Welcome to Wisdom of the World. Today I'm going to tell a story about foolishness. It's a story from India, from Karnataka in India. It's called In the Kingdom of Fools. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a king and a minister, and they were both idiots. They declared that night was day and day was night, and that all farmers should everybody should work in the nighttime and sleep in the daytime. Even the animals learned to sleep in the daytime. And if they did not follow the king's orders, they would be put to death. So, out of fear of death, people actually followed the king and the minister. And they both were quite pleased with the success of this project. Then one day, the guru and his disciple came to visit. And, they came there in the daytime and it was really quiet. There was nobody around. And then they walked around. They'd never seen anything like that. Again, with the sleeping animals, just crazy. And so once it became night and the people woke up and it was busy in town, then they got something to eat. They went to buy some food actually in the shop. And they could get for a cent, they could get rice, they could get wheat, or they could get a bunch of bananas. Everything cost 1 cent, no matter what you bought. They thought, oh, this is pretty good. This is an amazing city. And so they ate their fill. They could buy everything they wanted to buy and consume for 1 rupee. Just totally amazing. So, but the guru realized then that this was a city or a kingdom of fools. And he said to his disciples, better we don't stay here, because you never know what they're going to do next to us. And so he wanted to leave, but his disciple, he liked food. And so he thought, well, it's just so cheap here, I'm going to stay here. So you go, I'll stay here. So the wise guru left and the disciple stayed. And he got fat on rice and ghee and banana and other things. He became as fat as one of these roadside bulls that you see in India. Really fat. Then, in the middle of the night, there was a thief who broke into a rich merchant's house. And he made a hole and he climbed through there. And just as he went out, I guess he touched the wall a little bit much, and the wall collapsed on him and he died on the spot. Next day, his brother, the brother of the thief, went to the king and said, my brother was just practicing his old profession, and then this wall fell right on him. The owner of that wall should be punished. And the king said, don't worry, there will be justice. So he called in the rich merchant and says, hey, were you there last night? And he says, yes, I was there. And did you know what happened? And the merchant said, well, that the wall that fell on the thief? And the king said, the accused confessed. He must be guilty. You must be put to death. And then the rich merchant says, well, wait a minute, before you do that, it's not actually me who built that wall. The guy who built that wall, he should be punished, not me. I'm just, I just ordered that wall. And then the king said, yeah, that makes sense. Do you remember who made that wall? And he says, well, the guy's very old now. This was done in my father's time. But I know where he lives. He's an old man. So they got that bricklayer, and the bricklayer said, this was indeed, I remember, this was indeed a bad wall I built, but that was because I was distracted. I was distracted because there was this beautiful lady, sort of a prostitute type, that walked up and down and up and down. I was just so distracted I didn't make a good wall. And the king says, that also makes sense. The case deepens. It becomes more difficult. It's so hard to judge these complicated cases, said the king. And so he said, well, let's call that lady. And he said, the lady is very old. So that old lady also came, and she was shaking and trembling when she came before the king. And the king said, well, did you, walk around and distracted this bricklayer so that he couldn't build a good wall? And she said, oh, yeah, I remember that very well. I walked up and down a lot. But she said, you know why I walked up and down a lot? Because that jeweler, I had, wanted a piece of jewelry made. But that guy was just such a lazy bastard. He just didn't get it finished. And so I had to go back and forth to his shop many, many times. The king said, well, do you know the jeweler? They got the jeweler. The jeweler had his side of the story. And he said, well, Your Majesty, that is true that that lady had to walk a lot up and down and then distracted the guy who built the wall, and the wall fell on the thief and all that. But the reason was because I couldn't make her jewelry because I had to finish a lot of jewelry for this rich merchant because he was going to have a wedding. And you know how rich merchants are, they're so demanding. So the king said, well, do you know who was that rich merchant? And then when the king heard his name, that was the same guy who, complained in the first place, or whose house was burgled in the first place. So the king said, now justice has come full circle. We've really got the culprit now. We're going to get him. So again, they called the merchant, and the merchant said, well, wait a minute, that was my father who ordered that wall done, and who ordered the jewelry. That wasn't me. And the king said, yeah, I know. Your father was the true murderer, but, somebody needs to be punished. So you inherited from your father his gold, but also all his sins. So you must be punished. Okay, so he was going to be punished, and the king wanted pretty gruesome punishment they had those days. He had a new stake built, so they wanted to impale the criminal, supposed criminal. And then the minister thought, this guy, this rich merchant, is actually not thick enough to be impaled. And so they said, okay, the king said, okay, you're right, that's hard. So let's just find any fat man in the kingdom. We'll be okay, we'll just impale him then. That's good, new stake. And so they were looking and looking and looking, and then they came on the disciple of the guru, who by that time had eaten so much ghee and rice and bananas that he was hugely fat, and he was just totally suitable. And he says, no, you can't do that. I'm a sannyasi, I'm a holy man. And the guy said, well, yeah, you are, but the king's orders are like this. So the disciple prayed to his guru, who he had loved, and the guru who had said, you never know what these guys are going to do to you next. And the guru was right. So prayed to the guru, and the guru could see in a vision everything that was happening. He could see the past, the present, the future, whatever, he could see it. And so he immediately came to help his student, his disciple. And he at first scolded, yelled at the disciple, said, how could you be so stupid, etc. But he also whispered something to him. Then he went to the king and he says, King, wisest of all kings, who is greater, the guru or his disciple? Well, said the king, of course, the guru. Well, said the guru, then put me to death first. And then the disciple started to argue, said, no, put me to death first. They were both arguing who to be put to death first. The king said, this is odd. And then he says, why do you want this? And then the guru just says, don't ask these questions, just put me to death. And then the king says, this is so odd. He says, wise man, please, you are a wise man, so you must explain this to me. Why is it that you want to die? And then the guru took the king a little bit aside so nobody else could hear him, and he said, you know what, you know why we want to die now? Because I can foresee that the people who will be put to death first in their next life will become the king and the minister of this kingdom. And so the king, now he had a lot to think about. So he said first, okay, let's postpone the execution. That ought to be a bit later till tomorrow. And then he conversed with his minister and he said, we cannot just let some strangers become, king and minister. We need to. And then the minister agreed. I mean, they were both idiots, so they agreed that they should be put to death first. So at night they let the guru and his disciple go free, and they put on their clothes, and they had told the hangman, we sent you these people at night, so whoever comes first, you execute first. So they did as they were told. And the next morning the people saw the bodies of the king and the minister, and they said, what are we going to do now? They're both dead. Who's going to rule our country? And then somebody thought of the guru and his disciple, and they were just quietly making their way out of town. And they stopped them and said, would you guys be the king and the minister? Now, it didn't take so much convincing for the minister, but it took quite some convincing for the guru to say yes. And he only said yes on the condition that he could change any law that he saw suitable. Because they became king and first minister, and day became day again, and night became night again. And for 1 cent of a rupee, you couldn't buy anything. It just became like any other place. Thank you.